She had been carrying the letter for 6 weeks when the Alpha King's council voted to hang her for treason. She heard the vote through the anteroom wall. 12 voices, then silence. Then the sound of a chair scraping stone, which meant someone had stood to make it official. She sat on the wooden bench in the anteroom, with her hands folded in her lap and her spine very straight, the way she had learned to sit in rooms that wanted her to be smaller, and she listened to the silence that followed the vote with a particular quality of attention that had kept her alive for 23 years in a court that did not know what she was. The letter was tucked inside the lining of her left boot. She had unpicked the seam herself 6 weeks ago in the dark of the grain store where she slept, her fingers working the thread by touch because she had not dared light a candle. The letter was folded in thirds, the black wax seal broken and pressed back into place so that it would hold its shape. She had done this so carefully that the fracture lines were nearly invisible, but she knew them. She could have traced them in the dark. She had not read the letter. She did not need to. She had known what it contained the moment Lord Casimir had pressed it into the hands of the Kesavar ambassador, and said the words that came off him like heat from a banked fire. "This is the proof. Tell them it is the king's own hand." She had been standing 8 feet away, sorting cloth bolts in the textile corridor, and she had been invisible, as she always was, and the knowing had come into her the way it always came, not like hearing, not like seeing, but like a door being opened in her chest and the truth walking through it. She had known then. She knew now. The treaty that the Alpha King, Corvan Drath, had signed 3 months ago, the Kesavar Accord that had ended 4 years of border war, had been built on a document that bore his seal, but not his knowledge, drafted by a man who served him and had decided he knew better than his king what peace ought to cost. The bench was cold. The stone floor was colder. Outside the anteroom door, the vote had been taken, and now someone was coming to collect her. Her name was Ysolt. She had been in the capital court for 3 years, assigned first to the textile stores, and then, after a quiet winter reorganization, to the lower records office. She was the daughter of a dissolved house. The Felrath name had been struck from the peerage rolls 7 years ago when her father died without male heirs, and her mother had lacked the standing to contest the dissolution. The court had no category for her. She was not noble, not common, not a servant in the formal sense. She occupied a slot that the court's hierarchy had not been designed to notice, which suited her precisely. What the court did not know, what no one had known since her grandmother's time, was the Felrath sight. It had come to her at 14, quietly and without ceremony, the way her grandmother had said it would come, not as a vision, not as voices, but as a quality of knowing that arrived uninvited and was always, without exception, correct. She could not turn it off. She could not direct it. It came when it came, in the presence of a lie or a concealed intent, and it came whole and specific. She had learned to keep her face still when it happened. She had learned to find reasons for knowing things she should not know that did not involve explaining what she was. She had spent 9 years becoming very good at being wrong in public, letting small errors stand, deliberately misremembering minor facts in conversation, building up a reputation as a woman of decent memory and ordinary perception. The truth was that she had never been wrong about anything that mattered. The truth was that Casimir, the Alpha King's first counselor, had forged the king's signature on a document that surrendered the Felrath borderlands, her family's former lands, to the Kesavar nobility in exchange for a ceasefire that primarily benefited Casimir's own trade holdings. The Kesavar Accord was a peace, yes. It was also a theft. And Corvan Drath, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, the man who had fought 4 years to hold his borders, did not know. She had been trying to decide what to do about this for 6 weeks. The anteroom door opened. The guard was young, uncomfortable with the assignment. He did not meet her eyes. He said the council wished to speak with her. She stood, smoothed her grey working skirt with both hands, and followed him into the chamber. The council chamber of the capital court was built to be overwhelming. The ceiling was vaulted, the stone grey-white and old, hung with the banners of every noble house that had sworn the northern oath. The council table was long and dark, and had been in this room for longer than the current king had been alive. 12 lords sat at it, and at its head, not in the king's chair, which sat empty, but in the first lord's seat to its right, was Lord Casimir. He was a man of 60, precisely dressed, with silver hair cut close, and the particular stillness of someone who had learned long ago that motion was a sign of uncertainty. He was watching her walk to the center of the room with an expression of courteous concern, and the knowing came off him so strongly that she felt it like standing too close to a fire. He was afraid. The relief of knowing this was so sudden and so physical that she had to remind herself to breathe. "Ysolt of the dissolved Felrath house," said the lord to Casimir's left, reading from the document in his hands. "You are brought before this council on the charge of criminal theft, specifically the theft of a private correspondence belonging to Lord Casimir, first counselor to the crown, from his personal chambers 6 weeks ago." She said nothing. The document was a lie, and everyone at this table, except the lord reading it, understood that this was a procedural maneuver, not a charge with evidence. Casimir could not produce the letter without producing it. If she had it, producing it was the last thing he wanted. "Do you deny the charge?" said another lord. "I do not have any correspondence belonging to Lord Casimir," she said. This was true. She had a letter. Whether it belonged to Casimir in any sense he had a right to claim was a different question. "We have a witness who saw you enter Lord Casimir's anteroom on the evening of—" "I went to the anteroom to deliver a record request from the lower archive," she said. "I was there for 4 minutes. You may verify this with the duty clerk who logged my exit." She had been very careful 6 weeks ago to make sure there was a duty clerk and that he had logged her exit. She had not been entirely certain then that she would need it. She had brought it anyway. A small silence. The lord with the document looked at Casimir. "The charge," Casimir said gently, as if correcting a minor error in a calculation, "relates not to the date of your entry, but to correspondence removed at an earlier period, during a regular records delivery, when the anteroom door was left unattended." She looked at him. She kept her face courteous and still. The knowing was very clear. He did not know whether she had the letter. He knew he had lost it, and he knew she was the most likely person to have taken it. But he could not be certain, and the uncertainty was eating him, and had been for 6 weeks, and this council session was the mechanism he had found to force her hand without producing evidence he could not produce. "I understand the charge," she said. "I ask to see the evidence." The room shifted slightly. Asking to see evidence was not what an Omega-ranked servant without standing did in a council chamber. It was what a petitioner did. It assumed a right to process. "The evidence," Casimir said, "is the testimony of a witness." "A witness to what, specifically?" "To your presence in the anteroom on a date when the correspondence was last confirmed present." "With respect," she said, and she kept her voice level and polite, "the way you spoke to 12 men who had just voted to hang you. Presence in a room is not evidence of theft. If the council believes it is sufficient to sustain a capital charge, I would ask that the king be informed of the proceeding." The silence that followed was of a different quality. Several lords exchanged glances. Requesting the king's presence in a council proceeding was another thing a woman without standing did not do. It was also a right guaranteed under the Northern Charter to any person accused of a capital charge, regardless of rank. The lords knew this. Casimir knew this. The question was whether she knew it. She had been in the lower records office for 2 years. She had read the charter 6 times. "The king," Casimir said, after a pause that lasted long enough to mean something, "is occupied with the northern inspection." "Then I will wait," she said, "until he returns." They did not hang her that day. They put her in a chamber, not a cell, technically, which was important, because a cell required a formal charge on record, and Casimir apparently did not want the record. And they locked the door, and she sat on the floor with her back against the stone wall, and her left boot on her knee, and worked the seam open with her thumbnail, and took the letter out, and held it in her hands in the dark. The black wax was intact. The fracture lines were barely visible. She sat with it for a long time, thinking about what she was going to do next. The Alpha King returned from the northern inspection on the morning of the 3rd day. She heard him before she saw him. The change in the corridor, the quality of attention that moved ahead of him like a bow wave, the specific sound of a court that was recalibrating itself around a person who mattered. She was standing at the narrow window of her chamber when the gate opened below, and she watched the party ride in. 12 riders, then 20, then the king's own guard in their gray and iron, and then Corvan Drath himself on a dark horse, riding the way men rode who had been riding for 3 days and were not going to let anyone see it. She had seen him at a distance before, at court assemblies, at the great hall table during public feedings, at the territorial ceremony that happened every midwinter. She had never been in the same room with him at a proximity where her sight had anything to say about him. He had always been too far away, and too much in the category of untouchable and irrelevant to her survival for her to pay particular attention. She paid attention now. From the window, at a distance of 40 feet, with the morning light catching the ice on the courtyard stones, she watched him dismount, say something brief to the guard captain, and turn toward the main entrance. He stopped. He looked up. Not at the window, not specifically. He looked up at the tower wing with the particular quality of attention of a man whose instincts were telling him something his eyes couldn't confirm. He stood very still for 2 seconds. Then his captain said something, and he turned and went inside. Ysolt sat back down on the floor and held the letter and waited. He came to her chamber that afternoon. She knew he was coming before she heard the key. She knew the way she always knew, quietly, certainly, with the door in her chest opening before the door in the wall did. She was standing in the center of the room when the guard unlocked it, and when Corvan Drath stepped through the doorway, she was already facing him, and her hands were at her sides, and the letter was in her right hand. He was taller than he seemed at distance. The scar was on his jaw, left side, a clean old line that ran from the hinge of his jaw to the edge of his chin. She had seen it described in the records 3 years ago in the physical index of the royal household. Scar, jaw, left, origin, northern campaign, year 7 of the reign. He was looking at her with gray eyes that had the quality of attention of someone who was accustomed to reading rooms and was currently finding that the room was not yielding the expected information. He looked at her hands. He looked at the letter. He said nothing for a long moment. "You're the records clerk," he said. It was not a question. "Lower archive, yes." She paused. "You've been told a charge has been lodged against me." "I've been told a charge has been lodged," he said. "I've also been told the proceeding was conducted without a record. In my court." "Yes." He looked at the letter again. She held it out to him. He did not take it. He looked at her face. "Tell me what it is," he said. "It's a letter in Lord Casimir's hand," she said, "addressed to the Kesavar ambassador, instructing him to present it to the Kesavar Council as evidence of your personal authorization for the borderland transfers in the accord. The seal is yours. The signature is not." The quality of silence in the room changed. She held his gaze. She had learned not to flinch from the moment of telling someone something they did not want to know, the instinctive recoil, the search for a reason to disbelieve. She had been in this moment many times in her life. She had learned to wait inside it without moving. "You're telling me," he said slowly, "that my first counselor forged my seal on a treaty document?" "Yes." "And you have been in a locked room for 3 days rather than producing this?" "I wanted you present when it was produced," she said. "I was not certain what would happen to it if I gave it to anyone else." He looked at her for a long time. The knowing was very clear, much clearer than she had expected at this distance, closer to certainty than anything she had felt in years. He believed her, not because she had the letter, because she was telling him the truth, and he was a man whose instincts had been trained over 20 years of authority to recognize the particular quality of someone who was not performing. "How did you come to have it?" he said. This was the part she had been rehearsing for 3 days. "I have an ability," she said. "It's hereditary. It hasn't manifested in my bloodline in a long time. I know when people are lying. I know when they are concealing intent. I was in the corridor when Lord Casimir gave this letter to the ambassador. I knew what it was before I read it. I took it because I did not know what else to do, and I was not certain who I could trust. He said nothing. "I understand," she said, "that this is not a conventional account." "No," he said. "I understand that there is no reason to believe it." "I didn't say that." She waited. "You said the ability is hereditary," he said. "Which bloodline?" "Felrath." Something shifted in his expression. Not recognition exactly, more like the moment before recognition, when the shape of a thing becomes visible before the name for it arrives. "The Felrath site," he said. It was barely a statement. "You know it." "I know of it." He was quiet for a moment. "There's an archivist, Birched. He's been here since before my father's time. He's mentioned the Felrath site twice in 40 years of archive reports, and both times he marked it as a dormant ability. Last recorded manifestation 417 years ago," she said. He looked at her. "I read the report," she said, 2 years ago, when I understood what I had." He sent for Birched that evening. The archivist was a man of 70-something, small and deliberate, who arrived in the council anteroom with an oil lamp and the particular demeanor of someone who had been waiting for a specific conversation for a very long time and was refusing to appear smug about it. He set his lamp on the table, looked at Ysolt for a long moment, and then looked at the Alpha King. "The Felrath site," Corvan said. "Tell me what you know of it." Bert set both hands on the table in front of him. "The last recorded manifestation was in the winter of the 43rd year of the Aldenmere dynasty," he said. 417 years ago. A woman named Edith Felrath, who served as truthseer to King Aldenmere himself, and whose recorded testimony overturned 3 separate treason convictions, one of which involved a lord of comparable standing to your current first counselor. He paused. "The ability is specific to the female line. It cannot be trained or suppressed. Every account confirms that it is never wrong." He said this last part looking at Ysolt. She had the impression that he was saying it not for her information, she knew, but for the king's. "Never wrong," Corvan repeated. "Every recorded instance across 11 documented manifestations over 700 years, Bert said. Not occasionally accurate, not reliable, never wrong." The room was quiet. Ysolt looked at the letter on the table, in the lamp's amber light. The black wax seal caught the flame and held it. "The Kesavar Accord was signed 3 months ago," she said. "The ambassador has had the letter for 6 weeks. I took it from the diplomatic pouch before it was dispatched. I was in the records hall when it was being sealed, and I did not think. I simply—" She stopped. "I took it. The ambassador received a copy. I do not know what became of the copy." Corvan looked at her steadily. Then he looked at Birched. "Under the ancient protocols," he said, "what is the standing of a manifested Felrath truthseer in a crown proceeding?" Birched had clearly been waiting for this question. He did not need to think about it. "Institutional," he said. "Her testimony has the weight of documentary evidence. A manifested Felrath truthseer cannot be charged with a capital offense during an active inquiry. The ancient charter explicitly protects her standing for the duration of proceedings she is material to." He paused again. "Lord Casimir's charge against her was filed during an active truth inquiry she had already initiated by possessing and preserving material evidence. By rights, it was not a valid proceeding. By rights, Corvan said, she should have been in front of me 3 days ago. Yes, Birch said simply, she should have been. It should be said that Ysolt had not expected him to believe her. She had prepared for a longer fight. She had prepared for the version of this where the king defaulted to the man he had trusted for 15 years over the woman he had known for approximately 4 hours. She had prepared to produce the letter alone in front of the full council, to read its contents into the official record, to submit herself to the scrutiny of 12 lords who had every institutional reason to disbelieve her, and to do all of this without the king's backing. She had rehearsed this version in the locked chamber for 3 days. She had been afraid. She had sat on the cold floor in the dark with the letter in her hands and been genuinely afraid that it would not be enough, that Casimir's 15 years of carefully constructed credibility would outweigh a forged seal and the word of a woman without standing. She had not told herself she was brave. She had told herself, the truth has weight. You carry it to the right room, and you put it down, and you let it be what it is, and then you see. What she had not prepared for was Corvan Drath believing her before he had any reason to. Not naively, not without scrutiny. He had looked at the letter. He had sent for Birch. He was a man who did not arrive at conclusions before he had examined them from multiple sides, and he was examining this one with the rigor of someone who understood exactly how much it was going to cost him, if it was true. But she had watched his face in the lamplight while Birch spoke, and what she had seen was not the look of a man searching for a reason to disbelieve. It was the look of a man who had suspected something was wrong for 3 months, in the way that a person who has been told a room is cold will still notice when it is also dark, and who was now being given language for what he had already half known. He changed 3 things in the months before the accord was signed, Corvan said, to no one in particular, still looking at the letter. 3 procedural recommendations that I approved because they were presented as administrative simplifications. I approved them because I was managing a 4-front campaign, and I trusted that his recommendations were what he said they were. He was quiet for a moment. He's been my counselor since I was 19, he said. She said nothing. There was nothing to say to that would have been kind or useful, and she had learned a long time ago that the truth did not need her to soften it. It simply needed her to hold it steadily until the person receiving it was ready. Right, he said. He pushed back from the table and stood. He was very still, in the way that very large men were sometimes still when they were deciding something significant. Birch, I want the full archive file on the Kesavar borderland clauses on my desk by morning. All of it. The original survey records, the accord's secondary clauses, the full diplomatic correspondence. He looked at Ysolt. You'll stay in proper chambers, not the tower, the East Wing guest rooms. I don't need. You're the only material witness in an active Crown inquiry, he said. You stay in proper chambers with a guard on the door, and no one gets to you without my express authorization. He paused. "That is not a courtesy. That is a security arrangement." She looked at him. He looked back. The knowing was very still. "All right," she said. He gave her a single nod and turned to go. "Your Majesty," she said. He stopped. "I've been inside Lord Casimir's Chamber of Records 3 times in the past year on legitimate business. I know where the secondary diplomatic files are kept. If you want the full picture before you confront him directly, I can tell you exactly what to look for." A pause, then, "Come to the study at dawn." She was there at dawn. He was already there, at the long table, with 3 archive boxes open and a lamp burning low. He had not slept, or if he had, it was briefly. He looked up when she came in. He did not look surprised to see her early. "Which file?" he said. She sat across from him and told him, not just the file she had seen in passing. She told him about the knowing, carefully, the way she had learned to explain it. "It is not what I think. It is what arrives. I was in the room. I felt the intent." The file was the one Casimir did not want her to see, in the 3rd cabinet, behind the survey ledgers, in a sleeve marked with a red cord. The file was there. She watched Corvan open it and read it, and she watched his face do the quiet, controlled thing that it did. Not performance, not rage, but the specific quality of stillness that preceded a decision being made at a level below conscious thought, where the real work of a person happened. He read for 20 minutes. She sat across from him in the early gray light and waited, and she was not afraid. She noticed this. She had been afraid for 6 weeks, carrying the letter and the knowledge and the decision about what to do with both. She was not afraid now. She was sitting in a cold study at dawn with the man who had the power to determine whether she survived the next month, and she was not afraid. She thought about that for a moment. "There are 4 more documents," she said, when he had finished, "in the Kesavar ambassador's private records. He won't have destroyed them. The ambassador is not Casimir's man. He's a functionary who was told these were authorized Crown documents and had no reason to question that. They'll be in the standard diplomatic pouch, logged under the secondary accord clauses." Corvan set down the file. He looked at her across the table. "You've been preparing for this conversation for 6 weeks, he said. "I've been preparing for a version of it," she said. "This is not the version I expected." "What version did you expect?" She considered. "One where you were less willing to believe me before I had finished speaking." He was quiet for a moment. Something moved through his expression, not quite wry, not quite soft, somewhere between the two. "I've been running this court for 12 years, he said. "I've been lied to by people with considerably more institutional credibility than you. I've learned to notice the texture of it." He looked back down at the file. "You don't have that texture." She said nothing. The knowing in her chest was very steady and very warm. "I also notice," he said without looking up, "that you corrected the Northern Census margin error in the archive request you filed 3 months ago. No one asked you to. You left no name." She had not thought he knew about that. "The calculation was wrong," she said. "By 11 parcels, he said, "which would have mattered rather a lot if we'd gone to boundary arbitration with Kesavar, which we nearly did. He looked up. Someone who notices an 11-parcel margin error in a census document and corrects it without telling anyone does not strike me as the kind of person who manufactures evidence. She looked at him steadily. Or perhaps, he said dryly, you simply have very good handwriting. I don't, she said. My handwriting is mediocre. He looked at her. He looked at the file. He put it down and stood up, and there was something in the motion, the straightening of his shoulders, the specific quality of a man setting down something heavy and picking up something else, that told her the decision had been made. I'm going to need a truth-seer, he said, for what comes next. Yes, she said, you are. Are you able to tell me, in plain language, that you are not wrong about this? She looked at him. I have never been wrong about anything that mattered, she said. Not once in 9 years, not about this. He nodded once, short, certain. Then we begin, he said. They had 4 days before Casimir was scheduled to receive the Kosovar ambassador's next communique. 4 days to build a case that could stand in front of the full council. Not just the letter, not just the secondary files, but the full chain of evidence that turned a truth-seer's testimony from an extraordinary claim into a documented reconstruction of a documented deception. Corvan worked the way she had not expected a king to work, quietly, systematically, without theater. He sent for records without explaining why. He met individually with 3 of the 12 council lords he judged most likely to be uninvolved, not to convince them, but to establish that they had not been briefed, which was itself evidence of Casimir's operating perimeter. He sent a sealed dispatch to the Kosovar ambassador through a courier who was not part of Casimir's network, requesting voluntary attendance at a crown proceeding, framed as a routine treaty review. He did not tell Casimir. Ysolt worked beside him, not at his direction. He did not direct her towards specific documents, because her knowing did not work by direction. It worked by proximity and attention. She read the secondary files he opened, and she told him, clearly and specifically, which ones reflected concealed intent, which ones were genuine administrative records, which ones had been altered. She could not always tell him how she knew. She could always tell him that she knew, and she had learned to say so without apologizing for it. He never asked her to apologize for it. On the 2nd day in the afternoon, she was at the narrow window in the study when she heard him come back from the council meeting. She had listened to his footsteps enough by now to know them, and she turned and saw him in the doorway looking at her with an expression she had not quite seen on him before. It was the expression of a man who had just come from a room full of people performing composure, and had walked into a room where someone was simply standing at a window, looking at the light. He crossed to the table and set down a document. He moved against the Eastern Survey, he said, quietly. A recommendation to re-survey the border parcels. The recommendation went in 3 days before I signed the accord. She looked at the document. He was covering the land transfer clause, she said. If the original survey stood, the transfer was technically illegal under the border provisions of your father's charter. He needed the survey voided first. Yes, Corvan said. He sat down. He put his hand flat on the document and looked at it for a moment. Then he said, without looking up, My father trusted him. She waited. "He was my father's man before he was mine," he said. "He was one of the people who, when my father died, and I was 21 and had no idea what I was doing, he was one of the people who made the court function while I learned how to be a king." He paused. "I owe him for that. I have always known that I owe him for that." "Yes," she said. "None of which," he said, "changes what he did." "No," she said, "it doesn't." He looked up at her. She held his gaze and did not offer him anything easier to hold on to than what was true. He did not seem to want anything easier. After a moment he said, "How do you do that?" "Do what?" "Sit with someone in the middle of a difficult thing and not try to move them through it faster than they're ready to go." She thought about this. "Practice," she said. "I've known things people weren't ready to know for a long time. You learn to wait." Something crossed his face, not quite wry, not quite soft, something that was its own category. "Sit down," he said. "I want to go through the Eastern survey chain from the beginning." She sat down. They worked until the lamp burned low. On the third day, something else happened. She had known it was coming, not in the way of the sight, which was specific and certain, but in the subtler way of a person who had been paying close attention to the texture of another person's attention for 3 days. He kept finding reasons to be in the same room. He sent for her when he could have sent a message. He listened to her speak with a quality of attention that she had not often been on the receiving end of, the kind that made her feel that the room had become somehow smaller and more particular. She noticed these things with the methodical precision that she applied to everything, and she told herself that this was a person who was managing a crisis, and she was his primary resource in it, and proximity was functional, not personal. And this was a reasonable explanation that she continued to believe until the afternoon of the third day, when he handed her a document across the table, and their hands were both on it for a moment. And he did not move his, and she did not move hers, and the knowing arrived, not like a door opening, but like a window becoming transparent. And what it showed her was not a lie. She looked up. He was looking at the document. She moved her hand. He moved his. They continued working. She carried the "not a lie" carefully for the rest of the afternoon. On the fourth morning, she walked into the great hall. She had sent word to the council lords the previous evening, through the Alpha King's own channel, that a crown proceeding had been scheduled. She had done this with Corvan's authorization, but at her own initiative. It had been her idea to schedule it as a treaty review rather than a formal charge, which meant Casimir would be in the room without having been given time to prepare a counterposition. He would have the letter still officially missing. He would have a council that had voted in his favor 4 days ago. What he would not have was any idea what she had spent 4 days building. She carried the original letter. She carried 4 supporting documents from the archive. She carried a copy of the Eastern Survey request in Casimir's own administrative hand, and a certified statement from Burkt confirming the date of its submission relative to the accord signing. She wore her gray working skirt and her patched traveling cloak, and her left boot with the restitched seam. She had not dressed for the great hall. She had dressed to work, because this was work, and she did not believe in performing it. She walked to the center of the chamber floor, to the space in front of the council table, and she set everything she had brought onto the surface in front of her. 12 lords, Casimir at the right of the king's seat. The king's seat, today, occupied. Corvan Drath did not look at her when she entered. He was looking at Casimir, with the particular quality of attention of a man who had decided to let someone speak before he moved. Casimir looked at her. She watched the knowing come off him in a wave. She has something. She has had it all along. The vote was wrong. The proceeding was wrong. There was never a way to retrieve the letter by institutional means, and she knew that, and... She set the letter down. She set the Eastern Survey request beside it. She set Birch's certification beside that. She said, "I would like to address the Council on a matter of treaty integrity." What followed was not dramatic in the way that confrontations were sometimes imagined to be. There was no shouting. Casimir did not stand. He sat very still at the table, with his hands folded and his expression controlled, and he answered every question the council put to him with the measured, specific precision of a man who had spent 40 years in close proximity to power, and understood that the only way out of a room like this was through it. He was, she realized, very good at this. She had always known he was good at this. The knowing told her things about intent, not about capability. And his capability was formidable and real, and the reason he had managed what he had managed for as long as he had. But the letter was the letter. The survey request was dated. The certification was signed. And she stood in front of the council and spoke clearly, without performance, without apology, and she told them exactly what she had seen, and what she had known, and how she had come to have what she had, and she did not look away from anyone who needed to look at her, and she did not try to carry the weight of making them believe her. She simply put the truth in the room, and let it be what it was. The council asked their questions. She answered them. Birch spoke when the archivist protocols were questioned. Corvan spoke once, and only once, not to defend her, not to direct the proceeding, but to confirm in 2 sentences that he had not authorized the borderland transfers and had not signed the secondary clause of the accord. Casimir's hands, by the end, were very still on the table. The council voted. It was not 12-0. It was 9-3, which meant there were 3 lords still uncertain of where the political landscape was settling, which was reasonable and not unexpected. 9 was sufficient. 9 was more than sufficient. The vote struck Casimir's charge against her from the record, suspended his counselor's authority pending formal review, and requested his voluntary surrender of his administrative seal pending the inquiry. He surrendered the seal. He did it correctly, with grace, setting it on the table without looking at anyone in particular. His eyes found Ysolt once, briefly, as he stood to leave, and what was in them was not rage, not defiance, not the particular cruelty of a man who was going to find another way. What was in them was exhaustion, and the specific, bone-deep fear of a person who had spent 40 years managing a position that has just been overturned, and did not know yet who they were without it. She watched him leave. She gathered her documents from the table. She was very careful with them, the way she was careful with things that had mattered for a long time. Corvan was still in the king's chair when the lords had filed out. She was the last person in the room besides him and his guard captain, who had the tact to be near the door and facing away. 9-3, she said. It will be 12-0 within the week, he said. 2 of the 3 are managing information, not uncertainty. The 3rd is simply stubborn. I know, she said. The stubborn one will come around. The information managers will wait until they see which way the wind is settled, and then vote accordingly. He looked at her. You knew that before the vote, he said. Yes. Could you see? I could see their intent as I spoke, she said. Not their eventual vote, but what they were sitting with. She paused. It was enough. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Are you all right? She stopped moving. She set the documents down and looked at him. That is not a question I am often asked, she said. I imagine not, he said. Are you? She thought about it honestly. I'm tired, she said. I've been carrying this for 6 weeks, and I'm very tired. But I'm all right. He nodded. He stood up from the king's chair. The motion was slow, not because he was injured, but because he was tired too. She could see it, the specific fatigue of a person who has spent days managing the gap between what they know and what they are permitted yet to do. He crossed to her. She did not move. He stopped at a distance that was close enough to matter, and he said simply, Thank you. She looked up at him. I wasn't doing it for... I know, he said. That is why I'm saying it. She had nothing to say to that. She stood in the quiet of the emptied council chamber with the documents in her hands, and she was very aware of him at this distance, the height of him, the particular quality of stillness that she had learned over 4 days was not distance, but control. And she thought about the not a lie from the afternoon of the 3rd day and decided, for now, to simply hold it. Go and rest, he said. There's still the ambassador's deposition to... Tomorrow, he said. Go and rest, Ysolt. The first time he used her name. She noticed it. She could not entirely decide what to do with it. She went and rested. She did not see him for 3 days after that. The inquiry proceeded through official channels, depositions, document reviews, the careful institutional machinery that Casimir had built and that was now, with methodical deliberateness, being turned toward him. Bircht handled the archival components. 2 senior lords handled the deposition process. The Kesovar ambassador, who had indeed received the letter in good faith and had been as deceived as anyone, provided a full cooperative account and a formal request that his government's participation in the accord be treated as acting in good faith, which Corvan granted in writing before the week was out. The accord itself was not voided. It could not be entirely voided. 4 years of war had ended, and no one on either side wanted to restart them. But it was formally remanded for renegotiation. The borderland clauses were suspended. The Eastern Survey request was cancelled. The Felrath borderlands, which had been the specific territory transferred, were designated for review pending the inquiry's conclusion. Ysolt had not asked for the borderlands. She had not thought about them specifically in 6 weeks, not as something she wanted back, only as evidence of what had been taken. She thought about them now. She sat in the East Wing guest chamber in the evenings and she thought about her grandmother's descriptions of the high country north of the Felrath seat, the way the border light came sideways in autumn, the particular smell of frost on old heather, and she felt something in her chest that was not the knowing, and was not grief exactly, but was adjacent to both. On the fourth day, Corvan came to find her. He knocked on the chamber door, not the guard, him, and she opened it, and he was in plain clothes, which she had not seen before, without the formal dress or the armor of the past 4 days, and he looked slightly less managed than usual. "Walk with me," he said. They walked the east corridor, and then the inner passage, and then the back garden of the east wing, which was enclosed and bare in the late season, the paths clear of snow, but the flower beds standing empty, the stone of the walls catching the cold afternoon light. He did not speak immediately. He walked with his hands behind his back, and she walked beside him and waited. "The inquiry will conclude within the month," he said. "Casimir will face a formal tribunal. He will not escape institutional consequence. The specific charge will be treaty fraud under the Crown Authority Act, which carries a sentence of permanent exile and asset forfeiture." He paused. "Not a cage. The exile was his own request, and I granted it. He is 60 years old, and spent 20 of them keeping this court functional. I saw no purpose in a cage." "No," she said, "I can see that." He glanced at her. "You know he was wrong." "Yes, he was wrong, and he is also 60, and afraid, and exhausted, and did what he did for reasons that were not entirely without logic, even if they were entirely without right." She paused. "People are rarely simply one thing." He was quiet for a moment. "No," he said, "they're not." They walked in silence for a short distance. The light was cold and specific, the kind of afternoon light that existed only in late autumn, when the sky had that particular quality of blueness that meant frost by evening. "I want to offer you a position," he said. She stopped walking. He stopped too, and turned to look at her. "The role of truth-seer to the crown," he said. "It's a historical appointment. It hasn't been filled in 417 years. He paused. "I spoke with Birched. The appointment requires your consent. It cannot be commanded. Under the ancient protocols, a manifested Felrath truthseer cannot be compelled into crown service. She must choose it." She looked at him. "I'm not asking you to stay because the sight is useful," he said. "I want to be clear about that. I'm asking because—" He stopped. He looked at the wall. "Because I have spent 4 days working beside you, and I find that I am better at my work for it. Because you tell me the truth without apology, and I have not had that from anyone in this court for a very long time. Because—" Another pause. This one was different, shorter. "Because I find that I would like you to be here, not as a function, as a person who is here." She looked at him for a long moment. "You should know," she said, "that I cannot turn it off, the knowing. I know when you're managing information. I know when you're tired and not showing it. I know—" She stopped. "I know other things. I will always know. It would not be a simple thing having me here. "I know," he said. "You know now," she said. "It's different when it's daily." "I know that too," he said. He looked at her. "I'm not asking for simple." She looked at him. The afternoon light was on his face, and the knowing was very quiet and very clear, the clearest it had ever been in her adult life. The door in her chest open and still, and the truth walking through it without hurry. "Yes," she said. "All right. Yes." He let out a breath that was not quite relief, more like the sound a person made when something that had been held carefully was permitted to be set down. "Good," he said. They stood in the cold garden in the late afternoon light, and she was aware of him at this distance, the height of him, the particular quality of the space between them, and she thought, "This is not going to be simple." And she thought, "Good." He reached over and straightened the collar of her cloak. 1 motion, 2 seconds. He did not comment on it, and she did not comment on it. They turned and walked back toward the corridor. She carried the "not a lie" now, without trying to decide what to do with it. It was enough, for now, to know. The letter was mounted in a sealed glass case in the council chamber anteroom before the month was out. This had been Bert's idea, and Corvan had approved it without particular comment, which meant he considered it reasonable, and Ysolt had stood in front of it the morning after it was installed and looked at the broken and resealed black wax stamp and the familiar fold lines and felt something that was not triumph exactly, and not relief exactly, but was its own category of thing, the particular quality of a weight set down in a proper place and left there. The inquiry concluded on a Tuesday. Casimir's exile was read into the official record by the court registrar, witnessed by the full council, including the 3 who had voted against her, one of whom had indeed come around. The seal was formally voided. The Eastern Survey request was permanently struck. She was present for the reading. She sat in the chair that had been assigned to her, the truth-seer's chair, which was positioned to the left of the king's and slightly angled toward the council, the better to observe. And she sat with her hands folded and her spine very straight, and she listened to the formal language of institutional consequence, and she felt very still. Afterward, the council dispersed with the particular efficiency of people who had witnessed something significant and needed time to integrate it. Corvan remained in his chair. The registrar finished and left. It was quiet. 9-3 on the inquiry vote as well, she said. The 3rd information manager abstained. I noticed. He looked at her. How long before the 3rd votes correctly on something? Next month, she said. He's not opposed to the outcome. He's managing his relationship with the Kesavar trading house. When the renegotiation terms are confirmed, he'll have what he needs. Good. Corvan leaned back in the chair and looked at the ceiling. He was tired. She could see it. I have a meeting with the northern border lords in 2 hours. I know. I read the schedule. After the meeting, there is a formal dinner with the regional governors, which I have been avoiding for 3 weeks. I know that too. He looked at her sideways. What am I feeling about the formal dinner? Resigned, she said, but not as resigned as you were yesterday. The meeting will go better than you expect, and you'll arrive at the dinner in a better state than you're anticipating. He looked at her for a moment. I have no idea, he said, whether that is the sight or simply a very good observer. "Sometimes I don't either," she said. He smiled. It was brief and specific and unperformed, and it arrived on his face the way the dry comment had arrived 3 days earlier, from somewhere below the managed surface of him, the place where the actual person was. She had seen it twice before. She was collecting these instances with the same methodical care she gave to everything she considered worth keeping. "The northern roads are in poor condition," he said. This was a change of subject that wasn't entirely a change of subject, which she had begun to learn was a feature of how he communicated. The information offered as intimacy, the report as the thing he meant. "The third maintenance contract in a row that has come in under specification. I'm going to need the archive records on the contractors." "I'll have them on your desk by morning," she said. "You don't need to do that tonight." "I know I don't need to," she said. "I'll do it tonight and have them by morning." He looked at her. Something moved through his expression. The almost wry, almost soft quality that she had learned was its own category, particular to him. "Yes," he said, "you will." The great hall was quiet around them. The banners hung in the vaulted ceiling. The lamp on the council table burned amber and still. Outside the tall, narrow windows, the afternoon light had gone cold and silver. He stood. She stood. "Ysolt?" he said. She looked at him. "I changed your room assignment 6 weeks ago," he said, "when you were first put in the tower chamber. I had you moved to the east wing. I told the steward it was an administrative correction." She was very still. "The east wing is warmer," he said. "The tower chamber gets cold at night." She looked at him. She had not known this. The sight did not tell her things about actions taken out of her presence, only about intent in proximity. He had done this without her knowing, 6 weeks ago, when she was nobody to him, except an inconvenient procedural problem. "You knew about me," she said, "before I came to you with the letter? I knew you were in the lower archive. I knew you had been there for 2 years, and had not once in 2 years asked for anything." He paused. "I noticed that. I don't know why I noticed it. I simply did." She stood very still in the great hall, with the cold light coming through the narrow windows. "And the 11-parcel census correction," she said. "And that," he said. She looked at him. He looked back. Neither of them moved. She thought about 6 weeks ago, when she was unpicking the boot lining in the dark of the grain store, afraid, carrying the letter alone, and she had not known that anyone had moved her to a warmer room. "I have been carrying things alone for a very long time," she said. "Yes," he said, "I know." He reached out and put his hand against the side of her face. His palm was warm. She had not expected the warmth. She had been in cold rooms for a long time, and warmth, arriving without announcement, was a particular thing. She closed her eyes, just for a moment. His forehead came down to hers. She felt him exhale, slow, as if setting something down. She put her hand against his chest without deciding to, and felt his heartbeat under her palm, steady and present. They stood like that in the cold afternoon light, and it was very quiet. After a while he kissed her forehead, like keeping a promise. She did not move. "Go and get some sleep," he said quietly. "The records will be there in the morning." "You go and sleep," she said. "The dinner will be better than you think." She felt rather than heard the sound he made, not quite a laugh, not quite something else. He stepped back. She opened her eyes. She picked up the documents from the council table and walked out of the great hall, and she did not feel small, and she did not feel overlooked, and the boot with the restitched seam let in no cold at all, because she had fixed it properly this time, and there was warmth enough. 3 months later, in early spring, the Truthseer's chair was formally reinstated in the council chamber roster by a vote of 11 to 1, the single holdout being the stubborn lord who had principles about ancient precedent, and expressed them loudly, but voted correctly when it mattered, as she had told Corvan he would. The Felrath borderlands were returned to the Crown's direct stewardship, pending the formal re-establishment of the house, which was a legal process of considerable complexity that Bircht was managing with evident satisfaction. Casimir was in the West Territories and was expected to remain there. The world was not entirely restructured. There were still council members who were learning what to do with her, who found the Truth-Seer's chair an uncomfortable addition to their peripheral vision, who were not yet certain of the etiquette of a room in which there was someone who knew what they were concealing. She had expected this. She found it manageable. They would learn, in time, what the court at Aldenmere had learned 417 years ago, that the sight was not a threat to people with nothing to conceal, and that being honest in the presence of someone who would know anyway was, in its own way, a considerable relief. She had learned to stop pretending to be wrong in public. She had not yet learned to entirely stop sitting carefully, spine straight, hands folded, in a room that had once wanted her smaller. She thought this would take longer. That was all right. She had time. On a Tuesday morning in early spring, she was at the council table with the quarterly border returns when Corvan came in from the night session with the northern delegates and sat across from her and said, without preamble, "The third maintenance contractor is falsifying his surveys again. I want the full record." "It's already in the second stack," she said without looking up. "The red-corded file." He found it. He read it in silence. She worked through the border returns. The wolf had taken to lying under the table while she worked. It had begun 3 months ago, a Tuesday, the second week of her formal appointment, when it had walked into the council anteroom, which it did not usually enter, and lain down at her feet without invitation and gone to sleep. Corvan had said nothing about it. The council had said nothing about it, or rather they had said careful nothing in the particular way that meant they had noticed and were managing their response. It lay under the table now, with its tail moving slowly against the stone floor, which meant it was content, and the sound of it was a very steady and specific kind of quiet. She worked, he read. The early spring light came through the narrow windows, longer now than it had been, with the particular quality of morning light in the season when everything was becoming possible again. He looked up from the file. "The contractor's secondary surveyor is legitimate," he said. "It's the primary who's falsifying." "Yes," she said, "you knew that." "I knew it when I pulled the file," she said. "I thought you'd want to read it yourself." He looked at her across the border returns. "The northern roads," he said, "are going to be a project for the entire season." "I know," she said. "I'm planning for it." He looked at her for another moment with that expression, the specific category she had been collecting, that lived between wry and soft, and had no name she had found for it, except his. "How is the sight this morning?" he said. It was a thing he had started asking, carefully and without pressure. How is the knowing? Is the room manageable? She had not expected to be asked. She had become, over 3 months, careful and specific in how she answered. "Clear," she said. "The room is honest this morning. A good day to hear the Eastern delegation." "Good," he said. He looked down at the file. Under the table, the wolf's tail moved against the stone. She put her hand down without thinking, and the wolf pressed its head into her palm, warm and certain, the way it always did now, as if this had always been the arrangement, and they had simply been waiting for her to arrive and understand it. She worked through the rest of the border returns with her left hand on the file and her right hand on the wolf's broad head, and the early spring light filling the room, unhurried, like something that had decided to stay. She did not feel alone. She had not felt alone in a long time. She thought about the letter in its glass case in the anteroom, the broken and resealed wax, the fold lines she could still trace in the dark if she chose to. She had carried it for 6 weeks before she had set it down. She had carried many things for much longer than that. She was learning, slowly and with appropriate skepticism, to be a person who set things down when they had been carried to their proper place. She was learning what it was to be seen every day, without effort, without performance, without the careful management of what she showed. She was learning that it was not as frightening as she had expected. She was learning that the particular quality of a person's attention, his attention, felt different from the knowing, and worked differently, and mattered in a way she did not have precise language for yet, which was itself interesting, because she had language for most things. "Ysolt," he said without looking up from the file. "Yes," she said. "The northern roads are going to be a project for the entire season," he said again. "I want you at every budget review." "I know," she said. "I already put them in my schedule." He looked up at her, that expression. "Of course you did," he said. She looked back at him with the morning light between them and the wolf's head warm under her hand, and she thought, this is what it is. This is what it was always going to be if someone had only looked properly. And she thought, yes, this is right. This is exactly right. And she did not say any of it, because she did not need to, because he already knew, because she was sitting in a room with a person who paid attention, and the door in her chest was open, and what walked through it every morning now was not a lie or a concealed intent, but something entirely different, something that had been waiting 417 years for the right conditions, and had apparently decided that this cold stone court in early spring was at last the place. If someone outside the long windows had been watching, they would have seen a woman at a table working, her hand resting on the head of a very large wolf, and a man across from her reading a file in the early light. Nothing remarkable, nothing you would stop to look at twice. But the woman was not invisible, and the man was not closed, and the wolf's tail was moving steadily against the stone floor, and the morning was just beginning. If that was enough, it was more than enough. It was everything. If you had known something this important for 6 weeks with no one to tell it to, would you have found a way to carry it to the right room? Or would you have let it go? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. Until next time.